Yeah.
Maybe you feel invincible and empowered to do things which maybe there was nobody else holding them to account.
And she was even briefly interim treasurer. That's how much control she exerted. Her husband was chief executive, unprecedented for a leader of a small country to be first minister and her husband or partner to be chief executive of the ruling party for years and years. Yeah. They knew where everybody was buried. She knows where she knows all about the finances. And when people raise questions about the finance of the S&P, they were brutally moved aside or they resigned.
I keep thinking about, we were on air the morning that she resigned.
Yeah.
Do you remember? And she did her speech about how she just decided that, you know,
it
was a little bit Jacinda Ardern, wasn't it? There was nothing left in the tank. I'm just going to take a little bit of a break.
Yeah.
This, you know, it's been a really hard job and I'm really pleased that you've all been helping me out and now you just wonder...
Yeah, well, I remember writing the Mail that day for the next day. I wonder if this police investigation is the real iceberg that she was avoiding, and she's now collided with it full blood. It's a huge story, and for Labour Party in particular, this is hugely significant because she was very popular, she's still very popular, and Labour only won 1 seat in Scotland at the last general election. Labour MPs are now telling me they could win 20, which could make all the difference.
Huge difference.
It means the Tories will probably hold on to the seats they thought they might have lost, but I don't think they'll be the beneficiaries here. This is great news for Keir Starmer.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. The Times newspaper this morning is saying that Boris Johnson claimed that he was blocked from sharing COVID WhatsApps by the Cabinet Office, and we're going to have the ruling, aren't we, on all of that murky goings-on. The Privileges Committee, Harriet Harman, as we speak, she's just sharpening a knife, just waiting to see our reaction. And this is To The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10:25. You're with To The Point on GB News with me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. Now, we're talking about MPs investigating whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament. Well, we know what the report says. It's going to say he willfully lied to Parliament more than once.
That's right. The report is predicted to conclude that he lied. It's not really a shock to us, that, is it? They are investigating whether he misled Parliament about lockdown parties in Downing Street. And some days, I can't even believe we're still talking about this.
I know, well, I quite agree. And we think it's going to say he should be suspended for 20 days, but he's preempted that now because he's resigned as an MP. So we're now joined by Lord Marland, who is a great mate of Boris Johnson and an advisor to Boris. Jonathan, we can call you by your first name. I know we can. Good morning to you. You must be very sad. It's the end of the road, surely, now, for Boris Johnson, one of the most charismatic, clever Tory election winners in many a decade.
Well, it's very good to be with the dream team again. Thank you for having me on. To say I'm a good mate of Boris is not necessarily true, because if I was, I'd probably be getting a bauble added to my name because I'm a good mate. So I think that's unfair. I do think that it isn't over, amazingly, because of this constant desire to see him, to speak to him, to listen to him, to follow him around, particularly you in the media. He is this larger-than-life figure, whether you like him or not, and I agree he's a divisive figure. He's just got a charisma that very few other politicians have.
So what happens now, Jonathan? There will be a by-election, of course, in Uxbridge, in his constituency. He will carry on the public speaking circuit, which is making him an extraordinary amount of money, £5 million upfront payment for one particular agency in New York, by all accounts. And then what does he do? Does he just sit out the next election? Does he cause problems for Rishi? Come on, does he set up his own political party? That's one of the rumours that we've heard, funded by the Brexiteers. What does he do?
Well, I think he's got himself in a good place, hasn't he? Because he's preempted the inquiry. He is obviously genuinely outraged by it. He, as you say, is earning apparently $6.5 million this year and will continue to do so because he is an enormous draw on the world stage. He's incredibly popular everywhere you go with him, not just the world, but in the UK. People are paying him a lot of money to speak. He can sit and observe what's going to happen to the Conservative Party in the next next 18 months as we run up to the election, and then make a decision after the election, perhaps, of whether he wants to be part of politics again. So I think he's in a very good place, or even to perhaps put his name forward if the Conservative Party will have him as a candidate before the next election if things aren't looking too good for Rishi, which I very much hope they do look good for Rishi.
But it's unlikely their parties would agree to him being a candidate in another seat, Jonathan, when you consider he's triggering a by-election in Uxbridge, a marginal seat, majority of 7,000. I'd lay money on the outcome of that the Labour Party will win it and win it very easily.
Well, I wouldn't disagree with an astute reader of politics like you, Andrew. The reality is that things move very quickly. Who'd have thought that there would be this massive clamour for him to come back and challenge for the leadership when Liz Truss left as Prime Minister? You know, everyone was telling me then he was dead and buried. I'm not an advocate for Boris coming back, by the way. I'm merely saying there will be a large clamour for him. There is a huge amount of support for him throughout the country. He is a politician who's won 2 mayoral campaigns in a reputedly a Labour-led city. He's won the Brexit campaign, and most people would say he is largely responsible for doing that. And he won a landslide victory for the Conservatives, which we haven't seen in years. So he's a proven winner of elections. And as an MP, as a Prime Minister, he didn't do badly. I mean, he made some fundamental mistakes. Most Prime Ministers have, as we know, but he did get Brexit done. He did support very vocally Ukraine against his officials' advice. And then we did get the vaccines out quicker than any other country. So there are some very good things he has done, and he's being castigated for the things that he hasn't done because he's this divisive character. And people have mixed views on him, as they do on Brexit.
Absolutely. I wonder whether his star has waned a little, Jonathan, and whether he's still labouring under the illusion that he's more popular than he actually is. I don't know whether you saw the clip we ran this morning of Rishi Sunak was talking at an AI conference. We know how excited Rishi Sunak gets about technological matters, and he spoke quite firmly on the stage, and he said, I'm not going to cover his back, effectively. I'm paraphrasing. He said, it's tough. I didn't do what he would have wanted me to do. And the audience clapped. I thought that was quite interesting. That shows a little sort of sea change, perhaps, in terms of Boris's public popularity.
Well, I think, as I said, he's a divisive character, and he divides opinion in that regard. So there'll be some people that clap and some people that boo, of course. But that's the same with every politician who puts their head above the parapet. Very few prime ministers have left their office with their head held high, everyone applauding them, thinking they're the greatest living person that's walked the planet. And I'm afraid Boris fits into that category, as did Cameron, as did Blair, as did Thatcher, as did Brown, as did May, as did Truss. So it's not an unknown thing. And I personally am, I'm obviously a Conservative, and I want Rishi to win. And I've advised in the past Boris not to run and cause any trouble. Whether he does now or whether he takes my advice, I mean, who knows,
All right, that's Lord Marland. Jonathan Marland, thanks for joining us. I don't think Boris takes advice.
Well, he wants Henley-on-Thames seat. He's just bought a house round there. He stepped away now. He'll go away, wait till next election. Maybe they'll put him in there.
I don't think he's going to get it.
His former constituency, who knows?
We're going to be crossing over to Dover in a moment to discuss what impact the good weather had on migrants crossing the Channel. You can guess, can't you? That's after you more.
Andrew, thank you. Good morning from the GB newsroom. It's 10:33. Former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died in Milan. The billionaire businessman created Italy's largest media company before entering politics. He was in office from 1994 to 2011 with the Forza Italia party and left behind a career marred with sex scandals and corruption allegations. The 86-year-old had been suffering from leukemia for some time and had recently developed a lung infection. MPs will meet today to conclude their inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over lockdown parties in Number 10. The Privileges Committee has pledged to continue the investigation process after Mr Johnson stepped down as an MP and will later announce when it will publish the final report. In his resignation statement, the former Prime Minister branded the probe a witch hunt and accused the committee of being a kangaroo court. Scotland's First Minister is facing calls to suspend Nicola Sturgeon as a member of the SNP following her arrest. The former First Minister was questioned for 7 hours by police investigating SNP finances. Ms Sturgeon was released without charge pending further investigation and insists she's innocent of any wrongdoing. The 2-year-long inquiry centres around £600,000 worth of donations earmarked for the Scottish independence campaign. 2 men have been charged in connection with the murder and disappearance of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Detectives investigating the disappearance of Chloe Mitchell launched a murder inquiry on Sunday after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena. A 26-year-old man has been charged with murder and a 34-year-old man with assisting an offender. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2593 and €1.1681. The price of gold is £1,560 and 76 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,581 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Good morning. Still to come, we're crossing over to Dover to speak to our Home and Security Secretary, Mark White. You will not believe the migrants that crossed the Channel yesterday in the hot weather. This is The Point on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Good morning, it's 10:39. This is To The Point on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Well, a week on since Rishi Sunak, remember that? He said his Stop the Boats plan was starting to work as he argued the numbers crossing the Channel were down 20% this year.
Our Home Security Editor Mark White is live in Dover as crossings are expected to increase due to the good weather. Mark, good morning. It always seemed like a little bit of an exaggerated claim to say that the numbers were down in the first half of the year, particularly this weekend. These figures right back up again.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk to anyone that knows anything about the marine environment in the English Channel, they would have told you that the reason that the number of small boat crossings is down compared to the same period last year was everything to do with the weather conditions and very little to do with government policy. We have basically had northerly winds that have been blowing, and they don't need to blow at a particularly high level. When it's blowing from the north, anything over about 10, 12 miles an hour can really churn up the English Channel. It's blowing against the prevailing tide and just makes it impassable for these small boats to get across. That's what we've been seeing. Over the weekend, things have calmed down considerably. It's a bit foggy out there today, actually, which has probably had some kind of effect. But having said that, I was out from 5 a.m. this morning, and on board the boat with me, GB News presenter Nigel Farage, as we took a trip out to the middle of the English Channel, and within half an hour we saw our first migrant boat come across, packed with probably about 50 people taken off that boat and put on to a border force vessel. The boat itself, the dinghy, was recovered by another vessel, a catamaran that has been hired in by the Home Office for that operation. Then again, about half an hour after that, off we went to another small boat interception. In fact, 2 dinghies that were intercepted by border force and those occupants taken on board. We estimate that so far today probably about 8 small boats have crossed the English Channel, and this comes on the back of what looks to have been a record day yesterday. We're still waiting for the official figures, but we believe that at least 500 people crossed the English Channel in 11 small boats, and that would beat the previous record so far this year of 497 who crossed on a single day. So as I say, we're waiting for those figures to come in, but if they are true, and it's over 500, again with at least another 8 so far today, and we're still early on, more boats no doubt to come, we're looking at another significant day of crossings.
Remind us, where are we at with the Rwanda plan? Where are we? When are we going to see any sign of movement on that?
That's a good question, Bev. We are still embroiled in His Majesty's court system at the moment, with the Court of Appeal now deciding on the legality of this particular plan. You'll remember that the High Court, towards the end of last year, deemed the Rwanda plan to be perfectly lawful, but of course then the interested parties against this move were given leave to appeal. They duly did that and have appealed to the Court of Appeal. We're expecting within the next few weeks that we'll get a decision from the Court of Appeal as to whether it is lawful or not. Now, if it's lawful, what does Rishi Sunak do then? Does he seize the opportunity to finally get these flights moving, which he believes will act as a deterrent, or does he wait until another appeal is launched, which inevitably it will, to the Supreme Court this time? If he waits, then it's going to be very lucky, I think he'll be very lucky, if we get a decision before the end of this year, a final decision on whether this policy is lawful. And of course, how many people will have crossed the English Channel between now and the end of this year?
Unbelievable.
That's Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Into the studio with us now is the political editor of the Huff Post, Kevin Schofield. Kevin, I don't think they'll wait. I think if the Court of Appeal says yes to the Rwanda policy, he's going to get those planes up in the air straight away and let the Supreme Court rule much later.
I think politically it'd be very difficult for him. You know, he want to seize that opportunity that would have presented itself. Obviously, stopping the boats is one of the 5 pledges that he's made, and he needs to get cracking with it, or else he's not going to meet them.
I know. Now, talking about getting cracking, Nicola Sturgeon. Wow. Oh, my God. Can I ask you, as a Scot?
Yeah.
Were you shocked?
Yeah, I mean, it was a mixture.
It's seismic up there, isn't it?
It's huge. I mean, you know, she has bestrode politics up there.
Yeah.
For the best part of 20 years, because obviously she was Alex Salmond's deputy for a long time before she became First Minister. So the turn of events since February, you know, when she shocked everyone by resigning, and now being arrested. Now, we did more or less know this was coming. She's the other name on the accounts that signed off the accounts. Her husband, Peter Murrow, had already been arrested. The SNP former treasurer, Colin Beattie, had also been arrested. So we knew it was coming, but it had gone a bit quiet. Some people were already starting to think maybe they're going to not bother.
And the irony, Humza Yousaf's on the box yesterday morning doing a political interview, and he actually used the expression, Nicola Sturgeon is in a good place right now. She was probably in the cop shop at that moment.
Not exactly the good place that he maybe had in mind.
But, you couldn't make it up.
No, you couldn't. It was for it to happen on a Sunday.
But why didn't she alert him?
I have no idea. It's very unusual, isn't it? It's surprising that he was left blindsided.
Flat-footed and bovine.
Because it's not as if they turned up at her door unannounced at 7 in the morning. No. You know, it was pre-arranged. She had agreed to go in to the police station to be interviewed. So it was all, you know, done, I think, out of respect for who she is and her
But the day before, she's wittering on about passing her theories part of her driving test.
Yeah, that was unusual as well, wasn't it? So maybe she didn't know about it then, and maybe it was a kind of late on Saturday thing. But who knows? But as I say, it took us all by surprise on the day it happened. None of these things you would expect to happen during the week.
What would we expect other members of the SNP to say now? I keep thinking about Kate Ford, you know, who nearly became the leader of the SNP, and what she must be making of all of this. You wonder if she's in the wings, rubbing her hands together and thinking, my time is going to come.
She is.
She's probably glad that she didn't win, actually. She wouldn't want to be the leader while all this is going on. I mean, what's ironic is that, of course, during the SNP leadership campaign, Humza Yousaf painted himself as a continuity Sturgeon candidate, you know, and he was definitely the SNP's establishment candidate. Nicola Sturgeon didn't come out and say who she was supporting, but everyone knew behind the scenes she was definitely supporting him. Now, because of what's happened, he's trying to distance himself and strike out on his own, and every time he tries to do it, as you say, he was on the TV yesterday and interviewed.
So embarrassing.
He gets
if he wants to put space between him and her, suspend her.
Well, yeah, but that would be
seismic again.
Absolutely, I think
she would have done it if she was leader. She would suspend one of her cabinet colleagues.
I think there's a fair chance she would have done it, because obviously the reputational damage that this is doing to the party is enormous. But you know, she still is hugely popular with a significant chunk of not just SNP voters, but independent supporters. And I think also, given that Peter Murrow, her husband, wasn't suspended, I don't think he could possibly do it to Nicola.
Yeah, the reactions from different people from all sides of the political spectrum, and particularly identity politics, was quite interesting yesterday. There was some footage of a group of women in a pub in Scotland playing Jailhouse Rock and literally dancing on the tables. Because, of course, Nicola Sturgeon, for a lot of women, does not represent biological-born women, and they feel that her willingness to push through the Gender Recognition Act, effectively eroding the notion of biological sex, was very anti-woman sentiment. I mean, that's for 51% of the population. That's where her lack of popularity sort of stemmed from.
Well, she was certainly very strident on the whole transgender issue, and very. It was very controversial, obviously.
Where did it come from?
I don't know. It's something that she clearly, strongly believes in. But I think surprised a lot of people...
No clamour for it in Scotland?
No.
Some surveys saying Scotland is the most transphobic, if that's the right word, part of the United Kingdom.
Traditional
I'm not
views
sure about
on
that, but
gender, we might say.
I mean, what I think they thought as well, there was a political opportunity here when Westminster stepped in and blocked the law that was passed by the Scottish Parliament, and I think what the SNP were probably hoping was that might in itself annoy Scottish people enough that they increase support for
And it
independence.
didn't.
There's been no evidence of that whatsoever. So if that was part of the planning up, that obviously backfired. But yeah, that was one of the things that certainly her popularity was on the wane, I think, in Scotland before she quit. But in saying that, you know, the SNP were still miles in front in the polls when she went, and even now they're still the most popular party in Scotland.
They're still the most popular. I mean, they've gone down in popularity, but not as much as I'd have thought. You'd have thought they'd have collapsed.
No, well, absolutely. And the ordinary laws of politics don't seem to apply. I mean, because the Constitution is so such a major political issue in Scotland, I mean, support for independence itself hasn't really moved off the back of this. The problem that the pro-independence camp have got, though, is that the SNP is the vehicle for it. And if the SNP is in turmoil, then the independence campaign as a whole is in turmoil.
It's kind of the end of it, isn't it?
We all thought she was going to go strike out and have some major role in public international life. A lot of talk about the United Nations. All of that is on the back burner now until we know whether she's going to be charged or not.
Absolutely. I think that was the plan, certainly. You know, she's still relatively young. She's 53. She's still, you know, got a long, hopefully long, healthy life ahead of her, and, you know, could be making a contribution politically elsewhere. And I think you're right. I think that was certainly one thing that was mentioned. But all that is on hold now, and who knows what happens next.
Let's talk about this front page of the Mail today. Suella Braverman accusing Keir Starmer of being in the pocket of the eco mob. What's this about, Kevin?
Yeah, so I mean, this is interesting. Obviously, the Conservatives, I think, see this as a weak spot for the Labour Party. Now, what is bringing this to a head now is that there is the government's trying to crack down on protests, give police greater powers to crack down on protests. Now, Labour say they won't vote for it. They say that the current laws and the police already have enough powers, and the police say that that's true. However, the Conservatives say, well, hang on a minute, this puts Labour on the side of Just Stop Oil. You know, we've seen all the protests, the slow walking protests, the disruption.
They've taken $1.5 million from the guy who's been bankrolled.
Dale Vince, exactly. So they're putting two and two together. Now, Labour say they're coming up with 5. They're saying that there's no way that that this money in any way dictates or influences Labour policy. But I think it doesn't do the Conservatives any harm at all to sort of get it out there and at least plant the seed in the public's mind.
And didn't we read at the weekend Ed Miliband, who is the big green guru in the shadow cabinet, he's going to be at Glastonbury Festival on a platform with Just Stop Oil?
Right, well, I mean, it's certainly true that Ed Miliband is the driving force behind the whole green
agenda. A discredited old failed leader.
As far as, well, there are, I mean, I spoke to quite a few people last week. He's annoyed back to Scotland, Scottish Labour last week, because he's pushing this idea of stopping any new exploration in the North Sea.
Yeah.
That really annoyed
Just
Scottish
Stop Oil's
Labour
agenda too.
Well, absolutely. And Scottish Labour were blindsided by this, so they're not happy with Ed Miliband. I spoke to one person who says he should be pensioned off. Just get him out the door.
How many jobs would that cost in Scotland if they stop all the drilling and exploration?
Well, in Scotland, you're looking at about 100,000 jobs relying, and that's a lot of votes.
It is.
It's a lot of votes. Now, what Labour say is that they wouldn't cancel existing licences, and those run until the middle of the century. Still, you know, it's annoyed the unions as well, because it's put uncertainty over the whole industry and their members'
It's a gift for the Tories up there.
Well, it is, yeah. But again, I'll come back to what I said before. Up there in Scotland, you know, it's so hard to cut through the whole constitutional debate.
This piece that Suella Braverman has written in your newspaper, it is very interesting because she's really coming out on the side of the British public in opposition to the protesters. And she's saying that police chiefs have said they need more clarity about what counts as serious disruption, so they're introducing a new legal definition, hopefully meaning that the police will have more powers to move people on. She says those who say we are restricting freedom of speech has it backwards. The majority of protesting in Wales are peaceful and cause limited, if any, disruption.
And she uses the language of the ordinary people. She says people are sick to death of Just Stop Oil. I am.
She's right about that.
Well, yeah, and Labour, to be fair, have also said they don't, they're not in favour of the tactics that Just Stop Oil use. However, it's difficult for them because they have taken that money from Dale Vince, and that leaves them open to criticism.
Thank you, Kevin. For now, we're going to get to your views as well in the rest of the show. We've still got an hour to go. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, very good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. As we start off a new week, high pressure is increasingly becoming a player in our weather. It is situated to the north and east of us, but it is gradually wanting to extend its way across the UK. For the meantime, though, there are still a few areas of concern that we do need to contend with throughout Monday. The first, just this heavy rain that's been clearing its way off Wales first thing this morning, has been quite misty and murky across some coastal areas as well. But inland, there's been quite a lot of sunshine to start off the day, and should be quite a lot of that throughout the afternoon as well. That sunshine, though, is going to trigger off some showers. They could be heavy in places with thunderstorms, and weather warnings are in force for these. Could provide some difficult driving conditions. But the sunshine is also going to help our temperatures to climb once again, pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius across parts of the Midlands and areas of England. Throughout Monday evening, some of those showers will linger for a time as you head home for work, but into the overnight period they will eventually clear their way off, and we'll see a good number of clear intervals developing for our inland areas. The cloud returning along coastal parts, particularly across the Irish Sea, the Moray Firth and down eastern coast of England. It's going to be another muggy and humid night for all of us. Temperatures definitely staying up in double-digit figures, so it could be quite difficult for sleeping. Tuesday, not looking too bad overall. There will be a good amount of sunshine to start off the day. Again, coastal areas will have to deal with the cloud first thing, gradually burning back throughout the day. Could still linger across some areas though. Just an isolated shower throughout the afternoon. Most of us should stay dry, and again, temperatures responding and climbing towards those high 20s of Celsius for the vast majority, and definitely feeling very warm. Temperatures slightly taking a bit of a tumble as we feed in an easterly breeze throughout the middle part of the week, and so slightly cooler but still very warm, mid to high 20s. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock. Welcome to GB News with me, Andrew Pearce, and Bev Turner.
Thank you for joining us this Monday morning. So our breaking news story this morning is that former Italian Prime Minister and billionaire businessman Silvio Berlusconi has died, aged 86. We're going to be reflecting on his controversial life.
Controversial is an understatement. We're heading back to Edinburgh as the fallout continues after former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was arrested and questioned for 7 hours over the SNP's finances yesterday. She says, of course, she's innocent of any wrongdoing.
And Rishi Sunak has slapped down Boris Johnson as the fallout continues since his resignation on Friday. We are building up to the release of the inquiry, the Partygate report any minute.
And the number of accidents with e-bikes is rising. There are now fresh calls for them to be faced with more rules for riders, including licensing and insurance.
As someone whose teenager came off his electric bike and broke his collarbone recently, I have an opinion on that story.
Sure you do.
Email us your opinions, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first of all, here's your very latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thanks very much and good morning from the GB newsroom at 11:01. MPs are meeting today to conclude their inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over lockdown parties in Number 10. The Privileges Committee has pledged to continue the investigation process after Mr Johnson stepped down as an MP and will later announce when it will publish the final report. In his resignation statement, the former Prime Minister branded the probe a witch hunt and accused the committee of being a kangaroo court. But Shadow Business Secretary Jonathan Reynolds told us he thinks Johnson's claims of being pushed out are unfounded.
He's got this committee report coming up, inbuilt Conservative majority. If that went against him, he's got a vote in Parliament, inbuilt Conservative majority, because they've got a majority. If you are found guilty, you've got to have a recall petition. That's 10,000 people at least voting in your own constituency that they don't want you anymore. And then you've got an election in which you can stand. So the idea has been forced out is ridiculous. But honestly, I don't think Boris Johnson knows what the truth is. I think he genuinely doesn't know when he's lying. And I think that is why he's got himself into this position, and ultimately it feels like his entire life and career have caught up with him in this last week.
Well, Rishi Sunak has confirmed Boris Johnson asked him to sanction key allies on his resignation honours list. Mr Johnson blames Downing Street for Conservative MPs failing to appear on the list on Friday, despite them being nominated for the House of Lords.
Boris Johnson asked me to do something that I wasn't prepared to do because I didn't think it was right. That was to either overrule the HOLAC committee or to make promises to people. Now, I wasn't prepared to do that. As I said, I didn't think it was right. And if people don't like that, then tough.
Scotland's First Minister is facing calls to suspend Nicola Sturgeon as a member of the SNP following her arrest. The former First Minister was questioned for 7 hours by police investigating the party's finances. GB News political reporter Catherine Forster has the details.
Nicola Sturgeon's arrest yesterday is part of a 2-year police investigation Operation Branch Form into a missing £600,000 of donations given to fund a Scottish independence referendum that has never happened. Now, her husband, former Chief Executive Peter Morrell, was arrested in April at their home. A forensics tent was put up in the garden. A £100,000 camper van parked in his elderly mother's drive was seized by police. Then the Treasurer, Colin Beattie, also arrested. And now, ultimately, former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, all questioned by police, all released without charge.
Former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died in Milan. The billionaire businessman created Italy's largest media company before entering politics. He was in office from 1994 to 2011 with the Forza Italia party and left behind a career marred with sex scandals and corruption allegations. The 86-year-old had been suffering from leukemia for some time and had recently developed a lung infection. 3 British people who were on a diving boat in the Red Sea off Egypt have died. The Brits were originally declared as missing after their scuba diving boat went up in flames off the resort town of Marsa Alam yesterday, but it's now confirmed all 3 died in the incident. It's understood the fire was caused by an electrical problem in the boat's engine room. An 11-year-old British girl has been shot dead in France and her father seriously injured, according to reports. A neighbour is said to have shot at the family outside their house in Brittany. The town's mayor says the neighbours have had hostile exchanges in the past. The mother was less seriously injured in the attack and her 8-year-old daughter managed to escape to get help. A 71-year-old Dutch man has been arrested. The Foreign Office says it's supporting the family. 2 men have been charged in connection with the murder and disappearance of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Detectives investigating the disappearance of Chloe Mitchell launched a murder inquiry on Sunday after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena. A 26-year-old man has been charged with murder and a 34-year-old man with assisting an offender. Ofsted's new reforms don't go far enough, according to the sister of a head teacher who took her own life. School inspections in England are to change after the suicide of Ruth Perry led to calls for reform. But Mrs Perry's sister says changes don't go far enough or adequately address the problems that the system creates. The reforms, which include more funding for wellbeing support for teachers and school leaders, have also been criticised by unions and Labour, who say they must go further. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
And that breaking news is the former Italian Prime Minister, the very colourful, controversial Silvio Berlusconi, has died at the age of 86 at a hospital in Milan. He was being treated for a lung infection as far back in April.
That's right. He was a huge figure in Italian and international politics, a billionaire businessman who created one of Italy's largest media empires. He served as Prime Minister on 4 separate occasions.
He was certainly a controversial figure, and I can recall when Tony Blair went on holiday. Tony Blair didn't like paying for his holidays, so he went on holiday to stay with Berlusconi in Italy and was absolutely mortified when he saw him, because there's Berlusconi, look, with a bandana on his head, and he looks like he's plastered Bisto on his face, fake tan, Cherie looking horrified, and Blair was trying to get away from him so fast. And I remember thinking, why don't you just pay for your own holidays, Prime Minister?
You wonder, though, with someone like Silvio Berlusconi, how do men... In fact, tell me, Andrew, how do men like that survive for so long? I mean, he was in trouble with the police for
constantly
fiddling the political books, in the air.
The bunga parties with prostitutes and very young women. He allegedly slept with a girl under the age of consent. And currently, at the age of 86, his current girlfriend was rather old by his standards. She was 33 and an MP.
It's extraordinary.
But of course, he was a media magnate. He controlled many of the TV stations and radio stations in Italy. So that could, and he was a hands-on.
That probably had something to do with it, because he could be curating his own PR every day in the media and managed to remain popular with the Italian people for so many years.
Yeah. He was, and he was still active in politics. His political party, which he founded, had MPs in the Italian Parliament, including his girlfriend, who won her seat last year at the age of 32. And he was still talking, with his incredibly badly dyed hair, by the way, of making a political comeback. You think a man with all that money could afford to get his hair... I mean, it looks like he's stuck a bottle of Bisto on his head as well.
I think it was probably a hair transplant and lots of colour as well. I mean, he was really raging against the dying of the late. He wasn't prepared to accept his own ageing and his mortality, was he? But yeah, we've lost him. He's died at the age of 86 this morning, is the news. It'd be interesting to see how the Italian people respond to that news. He will have the funeral of all funerals, I would have thought.
He certainly will. And of course, the TV companies will report it very well. Lots of views coming in, of course. We've been talking about Boris, of course, because we're going to get that Privileges Committee report later today. We're pretty sure it's going to say he would have been, if he was still an MP, suspended for 20 days, which would almost certainly have triggered a by-election in his constituency, which, by the way, Lord Ashcroft's poll last week said he'd win.
Yeah, he doesn't like being told. He doesn't like being told off, though, does he, Boris? He's got that schoolboy thing about him. He wouldn't. It's his worst nightmare that he would have to accept this report from Harriet Harman.
Of all people.
Of all people.
And what a mistake Parliament made in putting that woman in particular in charge of that committee. Look, she's a long-serving MP. She's a former cabinet minister. She's a lawyer, but she made her views crystal clear that Boris Johnson had broken the rules and they were egregious breaches of the rules. She made that crystal clear a year ago, so why did they put her in charge of the committee? Because it enables Boris to say, stitch up. They should have picked someone who was unsullied. Yeah, and Harriet Harman, when she wakes up in the morning, she thinks, how can I screw up the Tory party? She is one of the most party-political, party-proof politicians I've ever met. Do you know, when she was a young mother in Parliament, she brought her baby into the division lobby. It was 1983 or 1984. Mrs Thatcher, a mother, bustled over to see Harriet and to say hello to the baby. She's told me this story. She said she looked at the baby, she looked at Mrs Thatcher and thought, do I allow Britain's first woman Prime Minister see my baby, or do I run a mile and protect my baby? She ran a mile. Can you believe that? Can you believe that? That is how party political she is. What a great story she could have told her daughter. When you were one, the babe in arms, you met Mrs Thatcher, who was our first woman Prime Minister. Well,
it's pathetic, isn't it? It's ridiculous. I don't like stories like that with female politicians. You want, there's not... There's
bit of sisterhood.
Been, especially then, there was hardly any in those days. What have you lot been saying out there? Anne has said, this is in relation to Boris, of course. Anne has said he got us out of the EU, he got us through COVID, he nearly died from COVID, now he's out of politics, leave him in peace. And Bernard has said if we'd followed Boris's advice on COVID when he wanted to go down herd immunity, we wouldn't have the financial problems that we have now. I agree with that one.
Now, we're going to talk about Scotland again. It's just occurred to me, the money that is disputed in the Scottish finance, in the SNP finances, is 666,000. What is the sign of the beast in the Book of Revelation?
666.
666. I just make that point. I'm not drawing any inference from it, but it is an interesting figure, isn't it?
It is.
666. If you watch The Omen, Damon's got 666 embedded in on his head.
That's right. Well, Betty has said MPs in Scotland get arrested for corruption, MPs in England get a knighthood for corruption, mainly Tory ministers.
Betty,
and
please.
I do like this, Simon. Nicola said, nothing left in the tank. It turns out she meant nothing left in the bank.
Boom, boom. That's very good.
Very good. And Leon has said Boris letting loose is an example of corruption. The committees are normally a slap on the wrist and a way of marking their own homework. I mean, obviously I had very strong opinions about the lockdown policies, and I part of me likes the idea that he's been hoisted by his own petard. So if you're going to put out these stupid rules and they come back and bite you, I'm sort of all right with that, because I thought they were ridiculous in the first place.
And they were draconian.
They were absolutely awful, and now we're seeing the results of so many policies. But in those WhatsApp messages that we saw in the Telegraph, Boris was the only person trying to speak some sort of sense in some of those groups.
He also didn't want to lock down at all.
Exactly.
In the first place. And I think it was a noble ambition for a Tory Prime Minister to try to protect the economy, because he knew the damage it would do. And it's done huge damage, and we're still paying for it.
But he was too weak to stand up for what he
believed. It was the herd mentality. They're doing it in France, they're doing it in Germany, so we have to do it too. That's what it was about.
I think that's kind of weak, though, isn't it?
I think it is.
So Scottish First Minister Humza Yousaf is facing pressure, as we've been talking about this morning, to suspend Nicola Sturgeon after she was arrested and questioned by police for 7 hours in relation to the SNP's finances.
She was later released without charge, claiming she was innocent of all wrongdoing, and she called yesterday's events deeply distressing.
Let's speak to our political reporter, Catherine Forster now, who is in Holyrood this morning. Catherine, I was saying earlier that the fact that she was arrested would suggest that the police wanted to seize Nicola Sturgeon's personal tech, her phones, her laptops, etc. So it doesn't necessarily mean that she's completely out of the woods at this stage, does it?
No, certainly not. I mean, this is an investigation that Police Scotland have been carrying out now for almost 2 years into this missing £600,000 of donations given for an independence referendum that has never happened. And the question is, what happened to the money? So, sure, she has been released without charge after 7 hours of questioning, as was her husband, Peter Murrell, a couple of months ago, as was the former Treasurer, Colin Beattie, also in April. But that does not mean necessarily that no further action will be taken. This investigation has been going on for a long time. It does feel like it's building with some sort of momentum here. But meanwhile, no sign of Nicola Sturgeon. She hasn't returned to her Glasgow home. We are told that they've temporarily moved out to give the neighbours some respite. And no word from Humza Yousaf here. He has been very quiet since going on broadcast yesterday, saying before he knew that she'd been arrested, you know, that he'd been in touch with her, she was in a good place, etc. What a giant she was, which no one would dispute. She's been a huge figure in Scottish politics for a long time. But, you know, he was enjoying the chaos after Boris Johnson resigned in Westminster, talking about the drama and the soap opera. And, you know, Boris Johnson, sure, that's a huge deal too, but this is really massive moment, even though I think we all knew that sooner or later, given that Nicola Sturgeon's name was a signatory to the set of accounts, along with the Treasurer and the Chief Executive, this moment was going to come.
Catherine, I have a mischievous thought. Has anybody been to the mobile home, the £105,000 mobile home, which is on Nicola Sturgeon's 92-year-old mother-in-law's drive, which is part of the investigation into the finances? See if they're shacked up in there.
Well, we don't know where it is, do we? Because the police seized it. It was removed from the driveway. It's presumably in the police's possession. Who knows? But certainly no sight of Nicola Sturgeon, no word from Humza Yousaf, but we will keep you posted.
OK, thank you, Catherine.
The mind boggles, doesn't
Catherine Forster there. No, the mind does boggle. Joining us now is GB News presenter Neil Oliver. Neil, good morning. We're on the lookout for a motorhome with two fugitives and a pile of paperwork with potentially corrupt accounts in the background. Is that what we're looking for here?
Oh, it's been a fun, in some ways it's been a fun 24 hours for sure. I mean, for those of us in Scotland who had Nicola Sturgeon's card marked from the beginning, a dozen years ago, it has been a joy to watch. I mean, many of us, myself included, have been saying for years that the SNP is a bunch of clowns. And yesterday was the moment when finally the clown car pulled up and the doors fell off and the wheels fell off and the horn went wah, wah. So that was terrific. But you know, we live here. I mean, I'm sure it is very funny for people watching this and you know and seeing this ridiculousness play out. But it's a Pyrrhic moment in the sense that the SNP have had more than long enough to wreck Scotland. A reckoning for the SNP, if it is a reckoning for the SNP, it's come too late. The damage has been done in every sphere. It'll be generations in the fixing. The SNP have sown nothing but division up here, and the consequences are writ large for the people of Scotland.
Neil, when you look back at the press conference where she was her usual smooth self, she's an excellent communicator, saying there wasn't anything left in the tank. A lot of us, you included, I'm sure, were very sceptical and thought there's more to this than meets the eye. We knew this police investigation was going on in the background. She basically took the Scottish people for mugs, because that's really why she went when she did.
It's a tragedy that is unfolding here, realistically. I mean, many of us, and I count it as the majority, most Scots had the SNP's card marked long ago, but for some reason other people in other parts of Britain viewed her differently, and it was aided and abetted hugely by the complicit mainstream media that pumped out miles of column inches and hours of television suggesting that she was this, giant political figure. I mean, Catherine Foster there was echoing similar. She was a big figure in Scottish politics, I don't know, in the same way that Mr. Blobby was a big figure on Saturday night television for those of us of a certain age. But it doesn't mean Mr. Blobby was credible, just big and loud and maybe colourful. But the point is that most of us up here knew that the SNP have never cared a jot for Scotland or for the people of Scotland. The shout for independence was cynical. It was just a tool that they were using to get what they wanted, which was power and money and influence, which is what they got. And hopefully, if there's any positive to come out of this at all, it's that political pundits and commentators will look on and begin to perceive the SNP the way that I have and most of us have. And it's to say this in simple terms. The SNP, if the SNP was a person, it would be a weird, creepy person that was up to no good. It would be the kind of person that if they got on the late bus, you'd be praying that they would sit down beside somebody else and not you. And millions of us in Scotland have seen the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon and her cohort for that for years. But it reached a high watermark during the lockdown when the BBC in Scotland gave Nicola Sturgeon live television coverage every day about her political machinations. It was absolutely galling and sickening to watch. But here we are, as you were rightly saying in your introduction, the SNP have been exposed, and it's at that ridiculous level, where people are speculating about where a mobile home has gone, and when we will next hear from any of these clowns, be it Sturgeon, be it Murrell, be it Humza Yousaf. But for us living in Scotland, the reality is, the TV pundits, you might as well be TV critics commentating on a soap opera up here, because the SNP and Holyrood have no input whatsoever to the well-being of the people of Scotland. It's a joke, and a bad joke, and it's on us.
So in a way, it sounds like, Neil, it's frustrating for you when you hear so much talk about this sitcom that is this party and the individuals, as opposed to the genuine political issues, social, economic, financial issues facing the Scottish people every day. So what are they? What is life like for Scottish people under the SNP?
Well, I grew up in a Scotland where, for example, to have been educated in Scotland, to have a Scottish education was something you could brag about, because a Scottish education it stood up well in the league table of educations that were available to people around the world. That is gone. So too, the NHS in Scotland is a disaster. Life expectancy in parts of Glasgow is lower than for somebody living in sub-Saharan Africa.
Wow.
The crime and the rest of it. Drugs deaths are an unenviable, incomparable high in Scotland. And I think quite honestly, what has happened with the SNP and in Holyrood and in Scotland is a microcosm for a much bigger problem, which is that politics in Britain, in the West indeed, is in a powerless state. It let people glimpse the fact that what happened with the SNP was because they were only in it for what they could get out of it. And Westminster too, on the bigger scale, is populated by more of the same. People that are just in that, they're just on the gravy train, they're just seeing what they can get out of it, and they're just in it for personal reward. And I would say, quite honestly, if you're asking me, that politics in Britain is dead at the moment. And as I say, people calling themselves, who are political journalists, they might as well be TV critics reviewing a soap, because in the same way that a soap has no meaning in the real world, neither do the machinations of those sock puppets, those empty, hollow individuals in Westminster. They have nothing to offer. And, maybe what's happening in Scotland with the SNP is just a glimpse that lets people see what a powerless state we're in with politics at the moment. If you're looking for solutions to Britain's problems in the political realm, then you might as well be looking under the bed.
Neil, if I could ask you just very briefly, just because of pressure of time, Nicola Sturgeon said at the Edinburgh Festival that Boris Johnson was a national disgrace to the office of Prime Minister. What do you make of that remark?
Well, what goes around comes around. I mean, she's a national disgrace to the people of Scotland. And all I can say, it is Pyrrhic. That is the word I would use. You know, if this is the death knell for the Scottish National Party, if this is some kind of reckoning for Nicola Sturgeon and what she's been up to for the last dozen years, then so be it. But, you know, when you live here, when you have seen what has happened to this proud country of Scotland under the bailiwick of the SNP, then, you know, it's funny to watch from the outside, but if you live here, the joke's been on us.
Yeah. Neil
Oliver.
Lovely to see you.
And don't forget Neil Oliver's show every Saturday, 6 p.m. It's watchable, and he's going to be talking a lot about the SNP, I suspect, on Saturday.
We need to point out that even though Neil says it is a Pyrrhic victory at the moment, she hasn't been found guilty of anything. She hasn't been charged with anything. We just want to make that clear.
Yeah, she's been arrested, and it's humiliating for her.
It is.
And her husband.
Right, still to
and
come.
the party.
With accidents and mayhem on the rise, finally, there are now calls to regulate e-bikes. People are being asked whether we should be getting these riders registration and insurance. You're with GB News. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
It's 11:28. You're with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner on GB News.
Now, the countdown to Wimbledon is on, 3 weeks away, in fact, and tennis fever is already starting to spread across the country.
In the West Midlands, a Solihull Tennis Club has opened its doors for a first-of-its-kind wheelchair tennis festival to try to make the sport more accessible.
Our reporter
Jack Carson. Our reporter Jack Carson went along to find out more.
As the world's tennis stars fit in their final preparations before the start of Wimbledon in a few weeks' time, one tennis club with big ambitions in Solihull is trying to make the sport accessible to everyone. Supported by the Lawn Tennis Association and their Open Court initiative, the Blossomfield Club hopes to raise the profile of the wheelchair version of the sport. Alan Wigley is a wheelchair tennis player at the club and says the physical and mental rewards are invaluable.
I was a fully abled tennis player prior to an accident only 3 years ago, and I've recently taken up wheelchair tennis. I think it's mentally, physically, socially rewarding, but it's also ageless. What would be great if this is successful, then we're going to look at other areas within, particularly the West Midlands, to see whether or not it's worth putting festivals on like this to expand the sport, and then perhaps even start a mini-league, which I don't think exists.
On Sunday, Blossomfield hosted their first wheelchair tennis festival with former Paralympian and British #1 Kay Forshaw in attendance. Kay says investing in the grassroots level of the sport is key to ensuring it's accessible into the future.
Becoming a Paralympian doesn't happen unless you have this foundation and these grassroots and the community and people supporting one another in terms of sort of development. When I was playing, the lottery funding was happening for me, which was incredibly helpful and motivating, because you are getting supported to train professionally.
But what are the differences in skill needed to play in a chair? Claire Williamson is the head coach at Blossomfield.
It's that initial thing of getting used to a chair that is quite responsive. So you get them into a chair very early on and get them moving around the court and maybe around some cones, and then getting the racket in the hand and just trying to get that sort of hand-eye coordination. I think the younger they are, the better. And it's such a great sport for just getting people together.
After being taught through the basics and how to control the chair, it was my turn.
Events like this are all about getting the community involved and letting everyone have a go. Not bad.
With high hopes of eventually being able to start a competitive wheelchair league in the West Midlands, Blossomfield are serving up the opportunity for players of all abilities. Jack Carson, GB News, Solihull.
Thank you, Jack.
I think he needs to work on his forehand.
Right, still to come. MPs and campaigners are calling for tough new regulations for e-bikes. Much needed, we think.
Yes.
After your morning's news with Tamsin.
Bev, thank you. Here are the headlines at 11:32. The Prime Minister has said Boris Johnson asked him to overrule the House of Lords Appointments Commission in approving key allies on his resignation honours list. The former Prime Minister is blaming Downing Street for Conservative MPs failing to appear on the list on Friday, despite being nominated. Rishi Sunak says it wasn't right and that he didn't feel comfortable making promises to people. Meanwhile, MPs are meeting today to conclude their inquiry into whether Boris Johnson misled Parliament over lockdown parties in Number 10. The Privileges Committee has pledged to continue the investigation process after Mr Johnson stepped down as an MP and will later announce when it will publish the final report. In his resignation statement, the former Prime Minister branded the probe a witch hunt. Former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi has died in Milan. The billionaire businessman created Italy's largest media company before entering politics. He was in office from 1994 to 2011 with the Forza Italia party and left behind a career marred with sex scandals and corruption allegations. The 86-year-old had been suffering from leukemia for some time and had recently developed a lung infection. Two men have been charged in connection with the murder and disappearance of a 21-year-old woman in Northern Ireland. Detectives investigating the disappearance of Chloe Mitchell launched a murder inquiry on Sunday after suspected human remains were found in Ballymena. A 26-year-old man has been charged with murder and a 34-year-old man with assisting an offender. And some breaking news now. More than 600 people crossed the English Channel in small boats yesterday, the highest number on a single day so far this year. It means the yearly total number of people making the crossing has reached more than 8,500. At this point last year, the total had just passed 10,000. Well, you can get more on all of these stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2592 and €1.1681 euros. The price of gold is £1,562.07 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,565 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Dubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know,
All
Kate
sorts
Moss?
of Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're gossiping.
We are.
We're gossiping about what Boris Johnson might do next. When we saw that picture of Nigel Farage there...
Well, we're going to talk about this later. Nigel Farage said, didn't he, on GB News yesterday with Camilla Tominey, we're Brexiteers together. We want to get Brexit done. It's not been done properly in either of our views. Could Boris join forces with Nigel Farage? That's an interesting idea.
And it's not cheap to start a new political party, but of course there are some heavyweight Brexiteers.
There's Reform, which is backed by Richard Tice, who's a very rich man.
Of course, Nigel Farage works with Reform. He's the president of Reform. So would that mean Boris Johnson joining Reform? Who knows? Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Now, a bit of a story which possibly could be a good news story, depending on what happens. Electric bicycles, you will be familiar with them. They've been causing mayhem across the country.
They're a pain.
They are a pain. So they are like a bicycle, basically, but you have an engine setting, so you can electronically cycle them. And they're big.
They're big. They go up to 28 miles an hour. They weigh twice as much as conventional bicycles. And there is pressure now for them to be licensed. And drivers to be insured. So Tony Campbell is Chief Executive of the Motorcycle Industry Association, who's got very strong views on e-bikes. Tony, morning. We know more and more accidents now are involving e-bikes. They can go up to speeds of 28 miles an hour. There's simply no regulation at all.
I'll just sort of stand you slightly corrected. There is some regulation, but it's whether it is fit for purpose. The e-bikes which are legal to be used on the road are up to 250 watt, and they have pedal assistance, which allows them only to go to 15.5 mile an hour, at which point the assistance should cut off. At the same time, there should be no assistance other than the initial start, that they should be powered at all. So in other words, you should always be pedaling. What we're seeing more and more, and they're now, I would say, in widespread use, is where these products are either modified or there are products which are outside of the regulation that are being sold and people are buying them, which and using them, of course, whereby they don't meet the regulation. And you made a reference to 28 mile an hour. Now, there are products available on the market which, strictly speaking, are for private land use only, that can actually perform to way beyond 28 mile an hour. And this is what we're seeing more and more in use. So from our perspective, effectively, they're motorcycles. They should be treated as such. I think the challenge here is how they are policed. And at the moment, we're seeing a situation where the current regulation isn't being policed. And therefore, what we need to see is a review of that regulation and make it easier for the police and enforcement to actually enforce the laws.
Tony, it's so interesting for me, this story. I have a dog in this fight. So my 18-year-old, who hadn't taken his driving test, convinced me that rather than having a bicycle to get to and from work every morning, he needed an electric bicycle because it involves some pretty steep hills. And I, stupidly, went along with the idea, thinking it might delay him doing his driving test, which frankly worries me a little bit as well, living in London. I quite quickly realised he agreed to wear a helmet. He was wearing a helmet on it all the time. I spent £120 on the best possible helmet I could find for him. He'd already been through 2 of them. And then he came off it, going too fast, coming down a hill, not understanding the speed, and broke his collarbone. It's now in our garage with a buckled wheel, and I'm under no intention of getting it fixed at the moment. But I think what's happened is there's so much naivety about them, so little information for parents like me who might be buying them for our teens and maybe helping out someone in their 20s can't afford a car. It looks like a really sensible thing to do, and it's dangerous. Why have they been allowed on the roads with no regulation? How is this? Have they got away with this, these companies?
Well, there is regulation that exists. It's just that I think the companies want to avoid complying with the regulation. The category is actually L1EA. And what that regulation does, it accommodates bicycles which are of higher power.
However, that said, they should still be limited to 15.5 mile an hour. And there is a requirement for licensing and protective wear. Now, of course, at the moment, it's very, very difficult. You can have two products which look identical to each other. One would comply with current regulation and therefore the laws of use, and the other one simply doesn't. So this situation has been created where people are using what purports to be an assisted pedal cycle, which is what the regulation says, but actually they're using a motorcycle. And if it's categorized as a motorcycle, it should be what's called whole vehicle type approved. You should be wearing a helmet, you should have a license, you should be insured, and the vehicle should be registered. But of course, if you can't tell the difference between an e-bike, which is legal, so up to 250 watt, pedal assisted up to 15.5 mile an hour, and a bicycle that performs like a motorcycle, then it's a bit of a challenge for the authorities to be able to do anything about it. So what we're asking for is there needs to be a regulatory review. In fact, the government in last year in the Queen's speech announced there was a paper that was announced to do a regulation review for vehicles and to accommodate these new products and new types. And of course, we're not talking about e-scooters today, which are another challenge. But to get some regulation that's fit for purpose, but also allows some new categories of the market. And unfortunately, Beth, you've fallen prey to that situation with your son, and it's unfortunate to hear about it.
I have. Can I also just ask you quickly, but would you like to see similar regulations to, of course, we have these Lime bikes and other bicycles that you can hire on your app. Those are electric bikes. They're all over the pavements at the moment. I mean, if you're in a wheelchair or you've got a pram, they're a total nightmare where I live. They're pretty fast and dangerous as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I would go as far as saying that the higher scheme bicycles or the e-bikes and also the e-step scooters, they would all comply with the current regulation. Now, that then brings us back to the question, is the current regulation correct? Is it the right thing to mix those types of products with both pedestrians and with other cyclists? And then, of course, if they're displaced into the main flow of traffic, is that then safe? So that's why, we're saying that there has to be a regulatory review. Just picking up on your point, Beth, when you decided to buy an e-bike, obviously an e-bike is not a cheap purchase. And in fact, you can buy an electric moped, which is completely legal, does require a license. You have to be 16 currently to use one of those, but they are built to a standard that then complies with all of the regulations and laws that are in place.
Yeah, it would have been probably the safer thing to do. Thank you, Tony. Fascinating. Tony Campbell there, Chief Executive of the Motorcycle Industry Association. It feels lawless on our roads at the moment. You've got electric bikes, electric scooters,
And cyclists, let's not forget cyclists hurtling through red lights all the time, particularly when I'm trying to cross a Pelican crossing.
Right.
You a cyclist, Kevin?
I'm not actually.
Nor am I.
No, I see these families out, the whole lot of them out cycling. It's just, that's not us.
Kevin Schofield is with us, political editor of the HuffPost, and also Bushra Sheikh is here this morning. Right, let us crack on to one of our top stories. Bushra, we haven't heard from you yet this morning. Unlikely coalition between Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage might be on the cards. Is that your idea of heaven or hell?
OK. Look, Boris Johnson is not my favourite person right now, and that's quite interesting because obviously I heard that Nigel Farage was saying that there's an opening at the moment, which I would agree. I think at the moment, in the climate we are, there is a very good opening for a new political party with a new agenda, because I do believe that people are incredibly torn right now. But I'm going to say this in the most respectful way, but it has to be slightly dumb and dumber in this situation. I just do not think...
How dare you talk about our colleague like that?
I don't think that it's going to be the best duo. It's, are they even going to get along? And people still don't like Boris, so why would you?
And look, is Boris a team player? Kevin, you've known Boris for years. You've been writing about him for years, as have I. He's not going to do it. It would require a lot of hard work.
Yeah,
if he's going to join with Nigel Farage, it would be reform, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's never going to happen. I mean, those two egos to begin with would just clash and it just would never ever
You're suggesting Nigel Farage has got a big ego?
couldn't possibly comment. But, I mean, Boris Johnson wants to be leader of the Conservative Party again. He does. And he wants to be Prime Minister again. He does. And that's not going to happen if he joins forces with Nigel Farage.
And new parties, they struggle. Look, Reform got 5% in the local elections. I think they've got about 5 councillors.
And we remember what were they called? The independent group, Tiggers. Remember
they vanished without trace.
There will be people screaming at the TV right now, Kevin, saying, hang on a minute, you lot, in your little Westminster Liberal elite bubble down there. We love Boris, we love Nigel. That is our dream union. They will. And they say nobody represents it. They say the Conservative Party are socialists. We've got Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt marching us towards a type of communism. You know, he would... The two of them together would certainly have a base. We might not agree with some of their... well, not necessarily Nigel, but we might not agree with what Boris did, particularly during lockdowns. I mean, I can never forgive him in my heart for that.
You're not. I mean, there's probably the best of 5 people that might agree with you, Bev, respectfully. But Nigel Farage has his own army of, let's say, people that don't find him... particularly nice, let's just say that.
He's divisive.
He's very divisive, and Boris has also done that. So I just feel like that duo together, it's not going to work. And I get that Nigel, has this optimism for a new party and all of this, but that's not going to work.
Big question, Kevin. Who would lead it?
Well,
would it be Nigel Farage or Boris Johnson?
Or Richard Tice?
Well, that's what I mean about the egos. I mean, they're never going to agree. Can you imagine Boris playing second fiddle to Nigel Farage or vice versa?
No, he doesn't like playing second fiddle to anybody.
No.
So I don't think it's going to happen.
I can see clear issues, I think.
The battle of the egos.
Could possibly work in practice.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Right, what do you want to talk about next, guys? Bushra, what story have you got next?
OK, so we can go and we can move on to, again, we can talk about Boris Johnson and about the WhatsApps. And revealing information. So at the moment, so obviously we know that, we had the independent inquiry about COVID. And he...
Well, we haven't had the independent inquiry about...
It's starting, and it's like...
3 years to go.
And...
40 million quid.
What's happening here is that he is undermining this investigation, technically, because what he's saying is that the information that he's willing to put out there for people to see, it's being censored. And he wants to have a blank canvas. Everyone gets to see everything, so the cabinet cannot hide stuff, So it's technically undermining that potential investigation by saying that they're not going to be acting correctly. So this is interesting, isn't it? Because it's now Boris versus the cabinet.
He's trying to play himself as the good guy here.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to be transparent and open. Rishi Sunak isn't. The Cabinet Office is operating, presumably, on the instructions of Rishi Sunak, but what they release and what they don't.
Absolutely, and this was the opening salvo last week of Boris Johnson's war against Rishi Sunak. Obviously, it's exploded since then, but it's puts Rishi Sunak in a difficult position. Why is he spending taxpayers' money on a judicial review, which even his own ministers, remember Mel Stride last week, basically said they'll lose it, and also... given that Boris Johnson is willing to hand over all this information
And what does it look like? It looks like, by Sunak saying, no, we can't submit everything, that they've got something to hide.
Well, the Times story says that there are hundreds of messages between Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
And you've got to imagine that they're not all... Because you know what WhatsApp's like, it's quite chatty, it's informal. Taken out of context, some of those messages could be quite damaging.
Only 20,000 died this week. Ho, ho, ho.
Well,
I want to see
type of thing.
That type of thing could have been said, and that will look terrible in the context of a public inquiry.
You can understand maybe why Boris Johnson is more keen than Rishi Sunak for these messages to see the light of day.
When Tory politicians fall out, they really do, don't they?
Well, that's incredible. I mean, it's great for us.
Isn't it feeling like a sense of this is now Boris versus Sunak? This is, it's still a COVID inquiry, but it feels like he's kind of going against Rishi Sunak, and this is now becoming a fight between...
It's like a proxy for the war.
Yeah. 100%. And Bev, I totally agree with you. Everything should be transparent. We should see everything. Nothing should be hidden with this.
Absolutely.
And that is the kind of footing forward.
It's the only way we're going to get any sort of truth about what happened, because the COVID inquiry under Baroness Hallett, I think, is going to be an absolute...
There's 3 years of it. I mean, Kevin, why is it going to take 3 years?
Well, that's
minimum.
That's it. I mean, it seems to be the way in this country, public inquiry. You think of the bloody Sunday inquiry.
12 years.
Absolutely. It's disgusting.
It's there's a lot of lawyers who are going to do very well out of it.
Yeah, of course they are.
The Iraq War inquiry was published 10 years after we went to war in Iraq.
Yeah.
What's this story about Ofsted, Bushra, in the papers today?
Well, do you remember, just recently we had the head teacher, unfortunately, Ruth Perry, who took her own life.
Yeah.
And she was the head teacher of the primary school in Reading. So this is about the kind of Ofsted standards and the way in which that they go and review the schools. So what's happened is the Department of Education are saying that they are going to make changes, but those changes, people are not happy with the changes that they're going to make because essentially they're saying that the way they categorise these schools is misleading. And the terminology that they're using is not right. So things like inadequate and good, it's very vague. Parents don't get a real idea of what the school is about. And this is why the teachers are so worried, because then they put all the effort in to make these schools the best for these children, and then Ofsted come along and give you this brand new something.
But it's too simplistic to say this suicide was because only of an Ofsted inquiry into her school.
I totally agree with you, because when it comes to the Ofsted standards, for me as a parent, I know that you can Google schools and you can get a lot of history about them. So just going by one word...
Go on to Mumsnet.
Yeah, you can go on to Mumsnet and see what other parents also say about the school. So I definitely think, because it's not common for head teachers to do this, but it obviously is a concern.
We have come to the end of our show.
Sadly.
It's absolutely flown by. Kevin and Bushra, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Coming up next is GB News Live with Tom Harwood today. This is To The Point with Andrew.
Hello there, very good morning. I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. So we start off a new week. High pressure is increasingly becoming a player in our weather. It is situated to the north and east of us, but it is gradually wanting to extend its way across the UK. For the meantime, though, there are still a few areas of concern that we do need to contend with throughout Monday. The first, just this heavy rain that's been clearing its way off Wales first thing this morning. Has been quite misty and murky across some coastal areas as well, but inland there's been quite a lot of sunshine to start off the day, and should be quite a lot of that throughout the afternoon as well. That sunshine, though, is going to trigger off some showers. They could be heavy in places with thunderstorms, and weather warnings are in force for these. Could provide some difficult driving conditions. But the sunshine is also going to help our temperatures to climb once again, pushing towards 30 degrees Celsius across parts of the Midlands and areas of England. Throughout Monday evening, some of those showers will linger for a time as you head home for work, but into the overnight period, they will eventually clear their way off, and we'll see a good number of clear intervals developing for our inland areas. The cloud returning along coastal parts, particularly across the Irish Sea, the Moray Firth, and down eastern coast of England. It's going to be another muggy and humid night for all of us. Temperatures definitely staying up in double-digit figures, so it could be quite difficult for sleeping. Tuesday, not looking too bad.